Hey, do you teach yoga? Have you ever trained to lead yoga classes, to be a yoga therapist? Have you ever owned a yoga studio? Maybe even just wondered what it was like for the women and men up there in front of the room on their mats, leading you through endless Surya Namaskars, down dogs, and pranayamas galore? Well, these are their stories, and mine. I'm Rebecca Sebastian, a 20-year yoga teacher, 10-year yoga therapist, yoga studio owner, and co-founder of a yoga-focused nonprofit. I've done a lot in the yoga world over the last 20 years, pretty much everything except had a water cooler. You know, a place to share stories, talk about struggles, successes, and find other people who do the same thing that I do. Welcome to Working in Yoga, a podcast and substitute water cooler for yoga folks to connect and build community, to share our unique profession, our challenges, and our journeys with the world.
Hey friends, welcome to Working in Yoga. This is week 3 of the series on the podcast, The Math Nobody Does. Spreadsheets, as I keep saying, are my mental health tools. And by the end of this series, I'm going to convince you of it. Now, I find a lot of solace in being able to make decisions based on math and numbers directly. And I want to share some of that honest thinking with you over the course of this series. So this set of Monday podcasts are on the math nobody does, because if we did, we'd have to change our minds about what we invest in, who we think is winning in the yoga industry, maybe shift a little bit less blame around to each other instead of focusing on who holds the real accountability in our profession. Before we begin, of course, if you do me a true favor and follow, subscribe, like, and if you're feeling generous, 5-star review the podcast from wherever you're listening. This helps the algorithm show the podcast to more people, which is obviously good. And it is a great help in letting us make more room around our water cooler for other yoga pros as dedicated as we are. Now, let's get into it about going independent and the math that nobody does. At some point, I truly believe this, in almost every yoga professional's career, the thought arrives in your brain, what if I just did this myself? There's no studio splitting the class fee. There's no schedule set by somebody else. There's no politics or policies, no percentage going to someone else's overhead. It's just you, your students, and whatever you charge. So going independent is genuinely viable, and it was the vast majority of my income for more than a decade. Many yoga professionals do build sustainable, meaningful careers outside the studio model entirely, even outside the group class model entirely. But the math of going independent in this way has a very specific shape. And most people who make that leap, especially people who make it out of frustration rather than planning, discover that shape the hard way. So today we're going to map it out for you before you get there. Here is, I think, the story that most people tell themselves about going independent. It's that if I'm getting $35 per class from the studio and students are paying $20 a class, if I go independent and charge $150, say, for a private session, that math is obviously better than what I'm getting paid at the studio. And I get to keep all of it. I work less. I earn more. That math is correct as far as it goes, but the problem is how far it actually goes. What the story leaves out is the cost of building the client base that makes that math work, the time, the marketing, the income gap during transition, the administrative overhead of running an independent practice, and the psychological weight of income that is not ever guaranteed. Going independent doesn't solve the financial precarity of a yoga career. It just trades one set of financial challenges for a different set. And the new set deserves for it to be understood by all of us clearly before you hand in your studio keys. So let's build the real picture. Okay. So how about we start with what you need before going independent makes any financial sense at all. Number 1, you need a client base, not a list of people who have expressed some kind of vague interest, actual committed clients who have paid you, returned, and built a habit of working with you. And these are your people, not your studio's people, and that's really key. For most independent yoga professionals, a sustainable practice requires somewhere between 15 and 30 regular clients, depending on session frequency and rates. And building that client base while still employed by a studio typically takes 1 to 3 years of deliberate relationship building. It requires teaching, connecting, following up, and figuring out how to convert interested people into private clients, a process that many studios explicitly prohibit in their employment contracts. And for full disclosure, I did. You need, second, a financial runway. Going independent means variable income, especially in the first year. Before you make the leap, you need savings that can cover 3 to 6 months of your fixed expenses. That's stuff like rent and food and insurance and loan payments. And for most people, independently, that's somewhere between $10,000 and $25,000 in accessible savings. And you own the overhead. So as an independent practitioner, you now own the costs that the studio was absorbing. Liability insurance. You're going to budget $200 to $500 a year for that. Scheduling and payment software. $30 to $150 a month, depending on what software you use. A website, $500 to $2,000 to build if you don't know how to do it yourself. $20 to $50 per month to maintain. And then there's, of course, marketing. And that's whatever time and money you invest in keeping that sales pipeline full. There's also self-employment taxes. As an independent contractor, you pay both the employee and the employer portions of Social Security and Medicare if you're in the United States. That's approximately 15.3% of your net income on top of the income tax you pay. A yoga professional earning $40,000 independently owes roughly $6,000, $6,100 in self-employment tax before income tax. Okay, now, shake that off. I know that was a lot of numbers, and taxes are wildly uncomfortable to talk about, but we need to talk about them if you're thinking about going independent. So let's look now at the income side. An independent yoga professional charging $100 per private session and seeing 20 clients a week, that's a full schedule by all standards, earns $2,000 a week, roughly $96,000 per year before taxes and overhead. Honestly, that sounds excellent. But 20 clients per week is a genuinely full schedule, and most independent practitioners run 10, maybe 15 regular clients a week, especially during the building phase. At 12 clients per week at $100 a session, that's, what do we want to say, $57,000, $600 per year gross income. Now you're subtracting self-employment tax and insurance and software and marketing and continuing education, and you're looking to bring home somewhere between $40,000 and $48,000. That's livable income for sure in many markets, including the one that I live in, but it's not a windfall. And it requires a full client roster that typically takes 2 to 4 years to build. So what does this math mean? Here's what I think this means for your decision. If you're thinking about this in your head and you're like, I really want to go independent and I want to make a run of it, going independent is worth it for a lot of people, and especially for somebody who's craving that autonomy, it is very real. The earning potential going above the studio ceiling is very real, and the ability to work with populations in the formats that align with like you and your actual skills and your passions, that is super significant, I think, for a lot of people. It gives us meaning and purpose in our work. But going independent from a plan is important, not from desperation. So make the leap when you have a client base and a runway and a realistic income projection, not when you're so frustrated with your studio situation that anything feels better. The difference between a planned independent transition and a desperate one is the difference between building something sustainable and spending 2 years in complete financial anxiety while trying to build a client base from scratch. So do the math before you make the move. Know your break-even number. That's the number that you have to make to break even to pay all your bills. Know your runway. Know how many clients you need before the income works. And then build towards that number deliberately before you leave any other work situation. Okay. I want to say, in my final send-off to you, my friends, independence is available to you as a yoga teacher or yoga therapist. It just has a very specific math that deserves to be respected. So I want you to plan the leap and then take it. Okay. If you want any of my free resources, of course, you can check the show notes, especially if you're trying to figure out how to price those services. I have a free, and it's free, no email even, pricing guide in the show notes. And then let's go get to work, my friends. I will catch you around the water cooler next time.